While the nation's intelligence community ran down possible suspects and tried to assess whether more attacks were imminent, rescue workers in New York and Washington confronted a disaster of immense proportions. In New York, local hospitals began filling up, urgent calls going out to every available surgeon and nurse, long lines of people outside waiting to donate blood.
It was a war zone. It was unbelievable.
And still, there was worse to come. At 9:59 a.m., the Trade Center's South Tower rescue workers in New York and Washington confronted a disaster
disappearing from the New York City skyline.
While the nation's intelligence community ran down possible suspects and tried to assess whether more attacks were imminent, rescue workers in New York and Washington confronted a disaster of immense proportions. In New York, local hospitals began filling up, urgent calls going out to every available surgeon and nurse, long lines of people outside waiting to donate blood.
It was a war zone. It was unbelievable.
And still, there was worse to come. At 9:59 a.m., the
unbelievable.
And still, there was worse to come. At 9:59 a.m., the Trade Center's South Tower, the building that took the second hit,
from the New York City skyline.
While the lines of people outside waiting to donate blood.
It was a war zone. It was the
second hit began to crumble. Collapsed and was gone.
Suddenly, we hear,
It was almost incomprehensible. In a matter of seconds, the skyscraper collapsed and was gone.
Suddenly, we hear, the security say, everyone get out now, everyone run for your life.
NBC producer Shahar Baran was there with a home video camera. NBC producer Shahar Baran was there with a home video camera.
A bunch of women just standing there, shocked. By then, the whole building sort of implodes. It just goes like this. And you see like a side of the building, and then it goes, and there's this ball, this of silver yellow ball sort of heading towards you, kind of in slow motion. You can't figure out what to do. People are starting to run like crazy.
Then, at 10 a.m., news of another passenger plane in trouble. Someone on United Airlines Flight 93, traveling from Newark, New Jersey to San Francisco, called 911 and reported a hijacking. Then, an explosion and silence. The plane crashed here, some 80 miles outside of Pittsburgh. There were 45 people on board. So far, 3 passenger jets used kamikaze style, and a fourth that might have been. 266 people on board killed. The death toll on the ground still unclear. Then, at 10:30, another sickening sight. The tower still standing, following its twin, collapsing, vanishing in a cloud of smoke. By 11 o'clock, the sense of alarm had spread across the country. Troops standing guard as national landmarks were shut down. Fighter jets actually patrolling the skies as the last airborne passenger planes rushed to safety. 11:14, officials trying to manage the disaster, struggling to describe it all.
First of all, Chief, do we have any idea of how many people are in there?
We have no idea. Now, as you know, it was pretty much rush hour time that this took place this morning, so the numbers we don't know yet. We tried to get almost everybody out that we could early on. 10,000 people in each tower would typically be in there on a normal business day. And we get about another 5,000 visitors during the course of the entire day. So by 8:30, 9 o'clock, the building should have been full.
And New Yorkers were struggling too.
And now they both collapsed. There's no more World Trade Centers.
At 11:42, another plane from Boston declared an emergency. Fearing a bomb on board, it landed in Cleveland. Soon, all planes in Canada as well as the U.S. were grounded. The borders with Mexico and Canada were sealed, and Major League Baseball announced the cancellation of all games scheduled for today. At 1:12, President Bush, at Barksdale Air Force Base in Louisiana, again spoke to the nation.
Freedom itself was attacked this morning by a faceless coward, and freedom will be defended. I want to reassure the American people that the full resources of the federal government are working to assist local authorities to save lives and to help the victims of these attacks. Make no mistake, the United States will hunt down and punish those responsible for these cowardly acts.
Moments after his speech, the president reboarded Air Force One for a then undisclosed location. Meanwhile, in New York, an army of rescue workers and volunteers from the city's building trades and other unions made their way to the wreckage of Lower Manhattan, seeking the injured and dead.
You guys going back?
Yes. It's our job.
You worried about that other tower?
Personally, I am. I got fellow officers that might be trapped. I'm trying to be a hero.
Those civilians who could made their way on foot across the Brooklyn Bridge as Giuliani called for calm in a city that was more shell-shocked than terrified.
And I ask the people of New York to do everything that they can to cooperate, not to be frightened of their lives as normal.
The mayor's news conference gave the first hint of just how high the casualty count could be.
There are over 1,000 rescue workers, probably about 2,000 deployed, trying to get to find people, trying to search the people. The governor, as I spoke a couple of hours ago, the governor has the nation brought to believe them because our people are going to need reinforcements pretty soon.
Just before 3 p.m., President Bush landed outside of Omaha from an underground bunker at the Strategic Air Command Base. He convened a National Security Council briefing. As 4 o'clock approached, the president spoke for him. Reporters back in a city that was more shell-shocked. The Trade Center's South Tower, the building that took the second hit, began to crumble.
Everyone, run for your lives. Can't figure out what to do.
Collapsing, vanishing in a cloud of smoke.
Day. So by 8:30, 9 o'clock, the building should have been full.
And New Yorkers were struggling too.
And now they both collapsed. There's no more World Trade Centers.
At 11:42, another plane from Boston declared an emergency. Fearing a bomb on board, it landed in Cleveland. Soon, all planes in Canada as well as the U.S. were grounded. The borders with
and punish those responsible. By a faceless coward, and freedom will be defended.
Typically typically be in there on a normal business day.
There's no more World Trade Centers.
At 11:42, another plane from Boston declared an emergency. Fearing a bomb on board, it landed in Cleveland. Soon, all planes in Canada as well as the U.S. were grounded. The borders with Mexico and Canada were sealed, and Major League Baseball announced the cancellation of all games scheduled for today. At 1:12, President Bush, at Barksdale Air Force Base in Louisiana, again spoke to the nation.
Freedom itself was attacked this morning by a faceless coward, and freedom will be defended. I want to reassure the American people that the full resources of the federal government are working to assist local authorities to save lives and to help the victims of these attacks. Make no mistake, the United States will hunt down and punish those responsible for these cowardly acts.
Moments after his speech, the president reboarded Air Force One for a then undisclosed location. Meanwhile, in New York, an army of rescue workers and volunteers from the city's building trades and other unions made their way to the wreckage of Lower Manhattan, seeking the injured and dead.
You guys going back?
Yes. It's our job.
You worried about that other tower?
Personally, I am. I got fellow officers that might be trapped. I'm not trying to be a hero, but I think if you were in this position, you'd do the same thing. It's our job.
You worried about that other tower?
Personally, I am. I got fellow officers that might be trapped. I'm not trying to be a hero, but I think if you were in this position, you'd do. If you were in this position, you'd do.
Home in a city that was more shell-shocked than terrified.
And I'd ask the people of New York City to do everything that they can to cooperate, not to be frightened, to go about their lives as normal.
The mayor's news conference gave the first hint of just how high the casualty count could be.
There are over 1,000 rescue workers, probably about 2,000 that are deployed, trying to get into the buildings, trying to find people, trying to search for people. The governor and I spoke a couple of hours ago. The governor has deployed the National Guard to relieve them because our people are going to need reinforcements pretty soon.
Just before 3 p.m., President Bush landed at Offutt Air Force Base outside of Omaha. From an underground bunker at the Strategic Air Command base, he convened a National Security Council briefing. As 4 o'clock approached, the president's spokesperson, Karen Hughes, briefed reporters back in Washington.
The Secretary of Defense remains at the Pentagon, and the Secretary of State is en route back to Washington.
5:21 p.m. Even as people around the country struggled with the enormity of today's events, a third building at the World Trade Center, damaged by this morning's attacks, collapsed.
They advised us to leave because we have... Oh, my God. Look behind us. Please pan in this way. Please be careful of your baby. This is it.
That's the building coming down.
Oh, my God. Oh, my God. Oh, my God. No.
Fortunately, the building with more than 40 floors had been evacuated. But once again, the concrete canyons of Lower Manhattan were filled with the sounds of sirens and the sight of people fleeing for their lives. At 8:30, the president, now back in Washington, addressed the nation from the Oval Office.
Today, our fellow citizens, our way of life, our very freedom came under attack in a series of deliberate and deadly terrorist acts. The victims were in airplanes or in their offices. Secretaries, businessmen and women, military and federal workers. moms and dads, friends and neighbors.
The president focused on America's strength as a nation.
Our military is powerful, and it's prepared.
He also issued this warning.
The search is underway for those who are behind these evil acts. I've directed the full resources of our intelligence and law enforcement communities to find those responsible and to bring them to justice. We will make no distinction between the terrorists who committed these acts and those who harbor them.
Tonight, search and rescue efforts continued at the Pentagon and in New York City, where the Twin Towers once stood, a hole in the skyline, an eerie glow, and the realization of just how much was lost on this terrible, terrible day.
Right now in New York, around 1,000 emergency workers are searching the rubble for survivors. Already, they've pulled at least 2 people out alive, and there are reports more people who are trapped inside have been calling for help on their mobile phones. Here's the latest on the search for life.
They have had a miracle of miracles here tonight. 2 Port Authority workers were pulled alive from the rubble and taken to nearby hospitals. At this moment, we cannot say the condition that these men are in, but we can say it was a source of great joy for the rescue workers, for the firefighters, when they were able to pull those men out. It is an unbelievable scene. People have been describing this that is much like a war zone. That is no exaggeration. It's hard for the cameras to capture the devastation that you see when you are right there in the middle of what was the World Trade Center, and when you look around and try and imagine where the World Trade Towers were. They are no more, Tom. It is just a shell. There are skeletons. There are fire crews who are hosing down the smoldering remains and saying that they are literally digging through the rubble, hoping that they will find more people alive. There is a staging area which is only 1 block from ground zero, if you will. We got there as well. It is where the firefighters are actually devising plans for how they will systematically go through each and every inch of this area. There, we have seen a whole corridor, or caravan, if you will, of emergency crews that are still coming into this area, and there are dump trucks that are being brought into the area, as well as excavators, so that they can literally plow through this rubble. But they're going to try and take some of this out, some of the rubble, some of the wreckage that has come from this building when they collapsed. And they've also, I should tell you, been hosing down the streets to try and make it a little bit easier for everyone to breathe, and particularly for those emergency workers down there in Ground Zero.
7 News reporter Mike Amor is in New York, and he joins us now. Mike, desperate rescue efforts are underway.
Well, that's right, Anne. Behind me you can probably see the smoke and fire still burning at the World Trade Center. And as you say, that rescue attempt is in full swing there. I guess we've seen something similar at the Threadboat disaster when Stuart Diver was found. Not dissimilar, the search here at the World Trade Center. Huge slabs of concrete piled on top of each other, probably millions of tons of what was the World Trade Center towers. They're hopeful but not confident of finding more survivors. About 5 hours ago they found 2 police officers in that wreckage who used their cell phones, in fact, to call for help. They found them alive and well, but so far plenty of dead bodies, unfortunately, but no more survivors.
Yes, it's a frightening situation. I guess they're hoping that there are people still buried under the rubble that can't be heard, that can't be seen, but they will get to, hopefully in not too short a time.
Well, that's right, and the difficulty is, of course, is lifting some of that wreckage up, some of those ruins up, and hopefully without with being able to keep those people alive if in fact they're still in there. We've seen dozens of tip trucks go past and heavy equipment that is now being used to excavate what was the World Trade Center towers. So this rescue attempt will go on for many, many more hours yet, Anne.
What concern is there, Mike, that some people may be hurt in the rescue attempts?
Well, that's a real concern, and remember that it appears from this distance that some of these fires are still burning. So many firefighters have died in the past 24 hours doing their job. braving the elements, I guess, in this disaster. And that's a real concern that some of these ruins may come down on top of them while they're trying to search for survivors.
Yes, we've heard that 265 firefighters are feared dead and up to 100 police are still missing, so it must be a terrible search for life out there.
You have to say that they were extraordinarily brave. They charged into those two towers while they were on fire and in danger, imminent danger of collapse, trying to search for any survivors and get them out of the building. They were caught, the firefighters and police officers were caught when those two towers came tumbling down. They had no chance at all of survival. But we have heard of one case of a company of firefighters, about 6 firefighters, who were on the 30th floor of one of the towers when it came down, and somehow they were able to ride those stairs down to safety and were able to get out of the building. So I guess we are hearing some amazing escapes, but in the whole, a terrible loss of life.
Now, downtown Manhattan has been closed, I understand, to the public. Where are the relatives then? Are they trying to get into where the World Trade Towers were?
Well, I understand there are several gathering points for relatives who are trying to find family members, and there are also several gathering points for the injured. I know at one point alone there are 1,500 injured. Hospitals have been overwhelmed by the injured here, as you could imagine. They've also been overwhelmed by offers of help for people donating blood. Blood is in short supply here after a big emergency like this, as you can imagine. And we understand that people have been queuing around hospitals in New York offering to give blood.
Well, here in Australia, we feel incredibly emotional to observe this horrific act of terrorism. I can't imagine what it must feel like for the people of New York.
Well, it's just amazing. They're going to wake up this morning with a huge part of their skyline missing, the World Trade Center towers, the Twin Towers. Such, I guess, an incredible part of this city gone. At 110 stories each, it's just hard to fathom.
Mike Amor in New York, thank you very much.
Prime Minister John Howard has warned it's likely there'll be Australians among the casualties. Mr Howard was in Washington at the time of the attack, and travelling with him, Seven's political editor Glenn Milne.
The Prime Minister was holding a news conference at his Washington hotel only minutes after the catastrophe in New York, when terror struck again only 3 kilometres away at the Pentagon. Through a window in the room next door to Mr Howard, flames and smoke could be seen suddenly billowing from the nerve centre of the US military, the site of a third major terrorist attack. Mr Howard was there only the day before. As US soldiers and police took control of Washington's streets, American Secret Servicemen and Australian federal agents immediately evacuated the Prime Minister from his hotel. As the White House, just across the park from Mr Howard's hotel, was also evacuated, he was rushed to the safe haven of the Australian Embassy 10 blocks away. Mrs Howard and son Tim joined him shortly after in a security bunker 2 floors below the embassy. Secret agents unloading semi-automatic weapons and sealing the building. All non-essential personnel of the 80-member staff was sent home. A clearly moved Prime Minister emerged 3 hours later to express his horror at what he called an act of war.
America has been hurt by today's events, but the American spirit will not be daunted or bowed or diminished by these events. The resolution of the American people will be evident, and they will respond in accordance with the courageous traditions of their country.
Mr Howard announced he'd sent a message to US President George W. Bush assuring him of Australia's support.
That those responsible for this despicable series of attacks upon the United States will be hunted down.
The Prime Minister also revealed he'd spoken to Acting Prime Minister John Anderson and security had been stepped up in Australia on all US and Israeli facilities.
On behalf of all the Australians here is to say to our American friends, whom we love and admire so much, we really feel for you. It is a terrible day. It's a day that recalls the words used by President Roosevelt in 1940 it's a day of infamy.
Whether the Prime Minister stays here at the Australian Embassy will depend on security advice, but it's now certain his trip to the US will be cut short and he'll return home as soon as practicable, possibly by RAAF jet. In Washington, Glenn Milne, 7 News.
An emergency hotline has been set up for Australians concerned about friends or relatives in the United States. The numbers to call are 1800 002 214 or 1300 555 135. The Australian Department of Foreign Affairs has an extra 100 staff to take calls, but they are overloaded. Everyone is urged to be patient and to persevere. Someone will take your inquiry as soon as possible. The numbers again for the 24-hour hotline, 1800 002 214 or 1300 555 135.
We go live to Canberra now, where a special memorial service for the victims of this attack is underway. Australia's Governor-General, Dr. Peter Hollingworth, is there, along with other political, diplomatic and religious leaders.
Determination to resist the forces of evil and to make the world a safe and secure place for the future. I call upon all Australians, whatever their belief, and upon all who belong within our different faith traditions, today and hereafter, to recommit ourselves to peace, to justice, and to freedom, and to renounce all forms of violence and evil, to teach our children what is right, to stand together without rancour as followers in the way that leads to peace and to righteousness. Such evil and disregard for the sanctity and value of human life does not form part of any of our traditions. In a moment of silence, let us then commit ourselves anew to these great hopes for humanity.
The Governor-General has already expressed sympathy to the United States Embassy on behalf of the Australian people, and earlier today he released a statement saying, Australia has stood alongside the United States since the terrible days of the Second World War. It was significant on the day immediately preceding this attack. The Prime Minister had the opportunity with President Bush to reaffirm the strength of the continuing close relationship between our two countries.
The devastation of the terrorist attacks is not only being felt in the United States. Australians are also in shock. In Sydney's CBD, people are keeping up to date with 7 News on big screens. Our reporter Monique Wright is there. Monique, what's the reaction of locals tonight?
As you say, and shock, disbelief, but also fear. Now, there's a feeling of uneasiness here as people gather in Martin Place. Many of them are watching this tragedy unfold for the first time. You watch them as they stare up at the screens, and as the pictures come across, their hands go up to their mouths in shock. They just can't believe that if this can happen in the United States, well, then every country in the world is vulnerable. Now, I've got some people with me here now. Now, Troy, you heard about this on the bus this morning. What was the feeling there?
Yeah, well, I didn't know about it before I got on the bus, but even as I stepped onto the bus, you could just tell that there was something different about today, that something had happened, and it was then that a friend told me about it, and I was just flabbergasted, you know. It's just, it was amazing. It was unbelievable.
What about in your office today?
Oh, well, our office actually was directly affected by this incident, and, well, I can tell you not a lot of work got done today, and there's a lot of sadness and a lot of anger around the office.
It's certainly a solemn feeling. Now, Peter, what about for you? What's the feeling been like in your workplace today?
One of horror. Quite a few had a bit of a poll at work, and quite a few have said if someone had given us guns, we had gone over and sorted it ourselves. But we've got to be realistic and let America sort it out. I think someone's put a bit of cheese in front of them. But once again, I'm saying I'm sure a lot of people would like to go and payback, but you've got to be realistic and think of this globalisation thing and keep it under control.
What about that feeling of uneasiness that we were talking about? Do you feel any sort of sense of fear?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's paranoia. I mean, walking around and, you don't know. I mean, I know we're a long way from the States, South Australia, but I've spent a bit of time in the Defence Department myself, and it's put one and one together, and I doubt whether we ever come to that far Australia will be affected, but I mean, it's always in the back of your mind that, if Mr. Bush or whoever's here is right, this kick.
Okay.
Yeah.
Listen, I've also got a couple of tourists that just arrived from Holland overnight. If I can bring these girls in. I mean, how do you feel? You've just landed here.
Yeah.
You said that you were talking to people back home.
Yeah, last night we heard it. We saw it on television in a pub in King's Cross, and we immediately went to our hostel. And I called my parents in Holland, and they told me in London buildings were evacuated, and in Brussels too, and about 250,000 people were killed or something. A lot. It was
I think
shocking.
that's an overestimation, but certainly there are thousands that are dead.
Yeah.
Now, listen, you were telling me that you do feel that fear.
Yes, it's really came as a big shock, and a certain fear, because it's America, and you don't expect something like that, especially not in America.
No, you certainly don't.
So it really came as a big shock.
Thank you. And there's a couple of hundred people gathering here in Martin Place, and the screen will be up all night. And as I said, a lot of people are walking out and seeing the new pictures, the rubble, the debris for the very first time. It's absolute shock.
Yes, I imagine there's little talk of anything else tonight. Monique Wright, thank you very much, and we'll keep everybody informed right throughout the evening. Thanks, Monique.
Thanks, Anne.
Well, as President Bush said, one of the big questions is who was responsible. US authorities have a likely suspect who was already their most wanted man. Terrorist leader Osama bin Laden is believed to have been responsible for a long list of attacks against American targets around the world.
An attack on America coordinated with military precision. 4 planes, split-second timing, penetration of airports and airspace, no warning.
They can destroy buildings, they can kill people, and we will be saddened by this tragedy, but they will never be allowed to kill the spirit of democracy. They cannot destroy our society. They cannot destroy our belief in the democratic way.
The first question tonight, is it over? The terrible answer, despite billions spent on U.S. intelligence, the nation's top experts do not know where or when terrorists will strike next.
The problem is that they are hard to penetrate. They are located in places that we're very hard-pressed to get any kind of information out of. And as hard as our agencies have tried, they've had some success. You don't hear about that. We only hear about the failure.
Who could have done this? Before today, the worst failure, the attack on 2 U.S. embassies in Africa 3 years ago. Again, perfectly timed, no warning, 224 dead. The alleged mastermind, America's most wanted terrorist, Osama bin Laden. Bin Laden also involved, U.S. officials say, in helping the man convicted of bombing the World Trade Center, Ramzi Youssef, 9 years ago, by protecting Youssef before and after that attack. Last winter, CIA Director George Tenet told Congress that bin Laden is capable of multiple attacks with little or no warning.
Osama bin Laden and his global network of lieutenants and associates remain the most immediate and serious threat.
Bin Laden's alleged millennium plots planned attacks on 3 tourist areas in Jordan frequented by Americans, on Los Angeles International Airport, and on a U.S. destroyer in Yemen, all foiled. But 6 months later, terrorists do strike successfully, ram another destroyer, the USS Cole, killing 17. In June, bin Laden brags on this home video of killing U.S. sailors, a remarkable tape made to recruit more terrorists against America. And just 3 weeks ago, a warning to a London newspaper, allegedly from bin Laden's group, that he was targeting America again.
I think it is a dilemma for the United States now. I believe the only thing is, to revise their policies, to look at what's happening. Why, for example, the anti-American sentiment is very high in the Middle East and in the Muslim world.
How could this happen? Only from a massive intelligence failure. But in this case, at least there will be some evidence.
The good news is that
hijacking 4 airplanes is a very complicated operation. Even hijacking one is complicated. And they will have left some trail behind them. They will have had to have checked in. They will have had to have purchased tickets either under their name or alias names.
While most of the world has reacted with horror, in some places people are actually dancing in the streets. There are Palestinian groups in particular that believe America had this coming.
These Palestinians in East Jerusalem today delighted at the bombings and American loss of life, offering cakes and sweets, calling out, "God is great." Thousands more celebrate in other West Bank towns until Palestinian police disperse them. The Palestinian leader, however, stunned and sympathetic.
We are completely shocked. Completely shocked. Unbelievable.
But the voice of the street reflects anger at America's role, especially in Israel and Iraq.
We should show America that they should learn and they should know what is to attack somebody like Iraq. It should be more.
And many Arabs furious at American support for Israel. This man holds up an American-made bomb part fired by American-made aircraft used by Israel. American support for Israel, some believe, makes America a legitimate target for terrorism. Many also angry at years of almost daily American bomb attacks against Iraq, which didn't stop with the end of the Gulf War a decade ago. And US troops still in Saudi Arabia. Osama bin Laden, the prime suspect in today's terror attacks, angry at American support for what he calls the tyrannical government of Saudi Arabia, his homeland, and for America's close ties with Israel. In almost a year of unrest, more than a dozen Palestinian suicide bombers and other attackers have killed 170 Israelis, while Israel has killed more than 570 Palestinians. A conflict that always threatens to suck neighbouring countries into the fighting. Israel tonight called for an international war against terrorism.
The fight against terror is an international struggle of the free world against the forces of darkness who seek to destroy our liberty and our way of life.
Today, the leader of Hamas, the Islamic militants who send most suicide bombers against Israel, called on America to change its policies. Sheikh Yassin said America is behind injustices in many parts of the world, but then he said Hamas doesn't support attacks against civilians.
And a different aspect of the story in the United States, where relatives of those aboard the doomed passenger planes have told how they received calls from their loved ones in flight. They told how they feared for their lives as the hijackers took control. And on the ground, there was panic.
Please. Shocked and grief-stricken, the relatives of those aboard the hijacked flights rushed to the airport, where authorities quickly took them to private rooms. Grief counselors from the Salvation Army joined airline personnel in trying to comfort the families of the passengers.
It's just to be there and to say to them, we are here and we'll do whatever we can do to help you through this trauma and this pain.
The first plane to crash into the World Trade Center, American Airlines Flight 11, was bound from Boston to Los Angeles, piloted by 52-year-old John Oganowski. This afternoon, his brother spoke to reporters.
I ask all of you for your prayers. For as I refer to him as Brother John. And I ask you to also pray for our whole country today.
Among the well-known passengers on the hijacked planes, the producer of the TV series Frasier, David Angel, and CNN commentator Barbara Olson, wife of U.S. Solicitor General Ted Olson. She reportedly called her husband twice on a mobile phone to tell him her plane was being hijacked, that the crew and all the passengers were being herded to the back of the aircraft. And on United Flight 93 from Washington to San Francisco, one of the flight attendants, Cece Myers, also used a cell phone to report that hijacking to her husband, a policeman in Fort Myers, Florida. By midday in Los Angeles, FBI personnel were swarming over the airport checking for possible bombs, but none were found. As a precaution, police and the FBI ordered the airport evacuated.
We're evacuating all terminals and we're stopping traffic all over.
An eerie scene at Los Angeles International tonight, the airport completely empty.
They are perhaps the most confident people on earth, but New Yorkers have been shattered by this attack. I look now at how this tragedy has affected some of those who live and work in this city of 8 million people.
The mighty World Trade Center tumbling down.
Oh, no! Oh, my God!
Everyday New Yorkers had to run for their lives. How fragile the city seemed today. We deployed a team of Dateline staffers to bring us images of a city under siege on handheld digital cameras.
What I saw today on the streets of Manhattan really were the extremes of New York. It's the best and the worst of people.
I got 20 blocks away when the smell and the taste really hit me. Way in the distance, the huge cloud on the horizon, but I could taste and smell something that was like the worst electrical fire ever imaginable.
They brought us a startling glimpse of what it was like to be at ground zero of a major terrorist attack.
What's it like down there?
Save 6 people. I tried my best to try to save everybody.
First, get away, then get home. Businesses were closed and buildings evacuated. Thousands upon thousands were left to negotiate a maze of closed streets and suspended services.
I didn't know if my dad is going to have a father, we don't have my husband anymore.
There's a real sense of panic on the streets among the tens of thousands of pedestrians, and it was easy to see why. Look to the horizon on the south, and you see an enormous gray-black cloud from the explosion.
As they moved towards safety uptown, people tried to keep up with the flurry of events any way they could. Even the wounded walked. This woman was on the 19th floor of the World Trade Center when the first explosion hit. Hurt, but lucky to get out before the building collapsed. We found her 30 blocks north, heading to Bellevue Medical Center.
A huge cloud of gray came and everyone started running and stampeding and everyone was falling on the ground. And I don't know what knocked me over. I don't know if it was the person or just the force of the wind. But I fell down, I just covered my head. I prayed that a building wouldn't fall on me, and I really thought I was going to die.
Doctors and medical students lined up like extras on the set of a disaster movie. Almost immediately after the attack, along with all 3 major airports, the city's subways, bridges, tunnels, and major highways were all closed. The FDR Drive, normally a winding snarl of congested traffic, empty. Thousands of commuters from New York's outer boroughs were left stranded in Manhattan. By mid-afternoon, a police officer on the scene estimated that more than 20,000 people had crossed the 59th Street Bridge on foot.
Local service only listen to the radio.
Meanwhile, Grand Central Station was jammed. But the trains were running until noon.
I remember standing in Grand Central and watching a man and a woman just scream and embrace each other and feel relief. I felt their relief to see each other again. After people had been managing to get out for about 15 minutes, all of a sudden they announced that they were evacuating the building, and people were ordered to get out immediately, and workers in their orange vests were running for the exits, and we didn't know what was going on. We just ran with them.
Confused passengers poured out of the building after a bomb threat.
It hit me that this building really could blow up, and I was scared. I was afraid that the building literally could blow up underneath my feet.
All around the city, it was a mass migration of hundreds of thousands of people, but uncannily quiet. Perhaps it was the unspeakable horrors many had seen.
It was orderly, but it was chaotic. People were shocked. Everyone was dazed. People didn't really want to look each other in the eye, I think, for fear of breaking down. The question on everybody's lips seemed to be, what is going on, and is there more of it that's going to come?
This was supposed to be Election Day in New York. As if anyone took note, it was officially called off. Everything was. What was open was tightly locked down.
What's that?
Can't be doing no pictures.
Okay, it's NBC
My point,
News.
Don't you understand?
It's NBC News.
I don't care who it is.
Security at all buildings that might be targets was extremely tight. Our own building, the famous tourist destination at Rockefeller Plaza, was evacuated, but for NBC's news operations to bring you this story. And all over Manhattan, there was this strange sort of gridlock.
The uptown avenues in Manhattan have been turned into virtual parking lots as everyone tries to flee northward. Meanwhile, the downtown avenues have all been sealed off but for emergency vehicles.
Cell phone service came and went. Anxious people called their loved ones the old-fashioned way. Sometimes that didn't work either.
People were forced to use payphones, which is kind of a joke in Manhattan because it's hard to find a payphone that works.
The only thing that was easy today was getting lost in the scramble.
She doesn't have a cell phone. They don't work anyway. She is not mobile because she's got emphysema and she can't walk very fast.
David Douglas's 64-year-old mother lives in an apartment building just 4 blocks from the World Trade Center. Soon after the attack, she had chest pains. So he flagged a passing car and the driver headed for the nearest hospital.
But I said, look, lady, please, my mom can't walk. Please just take her north as much as she can because she can't breathe well.
He tried to follow on his rollerblades, but lost track of the car and spent the rest of the day searching hospitals.
So I just want to know, is there any system of finding people with...
Well, they're doing the best. We're doing the best we can. It's pretty chaotic.
He searched family reunion centers.
Lucille Lobato. AVATO.
And even public schools desperate to find his mother.
Are there any people being kept here?
Finally, after 4 hours of futile searching, he called home. There was a message on his answering machine.
It's my mom.
She was safe, staying with a friend in his very own apartment building.
She's in my building.
For 2 New Yorkers, a small moment of comfort in a day when so many others will find none.
Inevitably, this attack has turned attention to the state of airport security. The big questions, what went wrong this time and what can be done to ensure it never happens again.
For years now, one of the primary focuses of aviation security has been to prevent terrorists from smuggling bombs onto our planes. But what was never fully anticipated was that the planes themselves would become the bombs, guided missiles in the hands of the terrorists.
It was a jet. I couldn't believe my eyes.
The agency charged with spearheading airport security and safeguarding the skies, the Federal Aviation Administration. Now, after the most devastating terrorist attack in U.S. history, the FAA, often criticized for lax enforcement and bureaucratic bungling, is itself under siege.
The FAA has blood on its hands because it's not doing its job and hasn't been.
Michael Boyd is an independent aviation consultant with commercial airlines among his clients.
We have a major security problem, obviously, and the FAA is at the middle of it. We've known this for years. I've said it for years, that to a trained terrorist, our airports look like a laundromat. You can get in and get out.
Along with each commercial airline disaster have come new revelations of serious failures by the FAA. Perhaps none more frightening than the multitude of security lapses.
Asking grandma whether she's packed her own bag isn't security when whole perimeters of airports look like sieves.
1988, Lockerbie, Scotland. A terrorist bomb blows Pan Am Flight 103 out of the sky. The aftermath brought both recriminations and recommendations. Our government assured us airport security would be beefed up. Additional security personnel were hired, metal detectors, X-ray machines, and most recently, bomb detection technology. All were deployed to combat the threat of terrorism. But time and time again, in the 12 years since Lockerbie, gaping holes in security have been exposed. Holes the FAA pledged to fix. Holes that government reports warned still remained.
holes that were likely exploited by these terrorists today. There appears to have been a total breakdown at least 3 airports in this country. Give us the scenario of what might have happened.
Well, there are 2 plausible scenarios. Either someone was able to get through the security site at those airports, or maybe even more likely, people working on the ground crews had been compromised.
How easy is it, and tell us the plain truth, to get a gun or a bomb on an airplane?
There are always some airports that fail when we try to get a gun or a knife on an aircraft.
How easy is it to get a job as a security screener?
It is as easy as falling off the proverbial turnip truck to get a job as a security screener. We have people that would be flipping hamburgers if they weren't working in the security function. They're not very well skilled, there's very high turnover, and I'm not sure that they're up to the job.
But inadequate screening of passengers and baggage is not the only threat to security.
We don't screen the people who work at airports properly. At tests that have been done at airports around the United States, we found a large percentage of, or certainly a large number of illegal immigrants, people whose background that we really couldn't check out.
In fact, as Dateline reported in 1996, our producers applied for and were given jobs at 2 of the biggest airports in the country. At Newark Airport in New Jersey, where one of the hijacked planes departed this morning, our undercover producer was hired on the spot, no questions asked, and no job references checked to drive this electric car. But within 2 days, he was working security, checking carry-on bags. He was given no training. And watch how our undercover producer wanders along tarmacs and throughout airplanes without the ID to be there. And he passes some 10 other airport employees without being stopped. At Hartsfield Airport in Atlanta, our producer was hired as a baggage handler without the required background check. Again, he was free to roam on airliners like this one. After Dateline's broadcast, the FAA did change policy to try to prevent these types of security breaches, but recent government reports indicate problems persist. This year, the General Accounting Office warned security screeners at U.S. airports continue to miss as many as 20% of weapons smuggled in carry-on luggage during FAA-sponsored tests, and that FAA plans to improve hiring, training, and supervision of security screeners, including the companies that provide them, are woefully behind, in some cases up to 2 years. It's too early to say whether the terrorists gained access to the planes today because of poor security checks or someone working on the inside. But this much is clear. The hijackings were well planned and the terrorists highly trained. Once on board, they knew exactly what to do. Experts say once airborne, there was little the crew could have done to fend off the attackers.
Once on board the aircraft, it would not at all be difficult to gain access to the cockpit. Cockpit door is not like the vault door in a bank, for example. They're rather fragile. You can kick them in if you had to.
Barry Schiff is a retired commercial pilot for a major airline who flew both Boeing 757s and Boeing 767s, the same kinds of jets involved in today's attack.
Pilots go in and out of the cockpit as they need to go to the restrooms. Coffee is brought to them, so the door is opening every once in a while anyway. And even if the cockpit door were locked and nobody were going in or out, it would not be difficult to threaten a flight attendant such that she would get the pilots to open the door because of fear for her life.
Though pilots are trained to handle hijackings, Schiff says historically they don't usually result in fatalities, much less the downing of an airliner.
In most cases, a hijacking is not a dangerous situation. Most hijackings are easily resolved. There's very little a pilot can do if an armed hijacker comes into the cockpit. In most cases, he'll believe that a hijacking is going to end peacefully. In most cases, they normally do. He would have no idea that his aircraft were going to be used as a missile.
Commercial pilots do have the ability to push a button to communicate to air traffic controllers that their plane has been hijacked. But apparently none of the pilots this morning even had a chance to send the signal.
If one had to speculate, I would say the terrorists were flying the aircraft, not the airline pilots who should have been flying the airplane. mainly because I don't believe any airline pilot would intentionally fly into the World Trade Center, even with a gun at his head.
We may never know exactly what happened in the cockpits, but both the FAA and the airlines had to have known that something was terribly amiss, as each of the planes veered inexplicably off their flight paths. What you are looking at is the actual radar tracking of the two flights that left Boston's Logan Airport this morning. American flight number 11, shown here is the blue plane, takes off first. United Flight 175 takes off next. Both proceed west towards Los Angeles. They are fully fueled for a transcontinental trip. Then, somewhere near New York State, the planes abruptly change direction, now flying southeast to Ground Zero, the tip of Manhattan. American Flight 11 finds its target first, Tower number 1. 21 minutes later, American Flight 175, in red, flies south of Manhattan, then makes a sharp turn to the north, where its final chilling moments aloft were captured on videotape. Meanwhile, United Airlines Flight 93 leaves Newark Airport in New Jersey for San Francisco. The radar shows that somewhere near Cleveland, the plane makes a sudden U-turn, then disappears. It crashed in this field near Pittsburgh. Its final destination unknown, but experts suspect that it was likely headed to a target in Washington, D.C.
Since the airplane crashed in a rural area, that there might have been a struggle on board that aircraft between the crew and the hijackers, and that the crew somehow managed to thwart the hijackers' intent of crashing that airplane into something else.
If that's true, the crew probably saved hundreds, maybe thousands of lives on the ground. Unfortunately, even their heroics will not be enough to save the aviation system upon which America relies so heavily.
A linchpin of our economy is our air transportation system. We can't do without it. It's not an accessory. As of today, that linchpin has been shut down. In the coming months, what we're going to find is an air transportation system that's totally different than we've known. It's going to be one where airports are going to be basically armed camps.
Providing safe and secure passage for the 640 million passengers passing through 1,000 screening checkpoints, traveling with more than 2.5 billion pieces of carry-on and checked luggage, flying on 97 air carriers is a monumental task that will likely take years to manage.
Let's check in again with tonight's memorial service underway in Canberra. Governor-General Dr. Peter Hollingworth is attending the ceremony held in honour of the victims of this terrorist attack. Other diplomats, religious leaders and politicians are also there.
Psalm 23, an excerpt from which was quoted by President Bush in his address to his fellow Americans this morning, our time. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters.
The Deputy Prime Minister, John Anderson there. Well, the 7 Network has suspended all regular programming for tonight, so stay with us all the evening for the latest developments.
Coming up, a special edition of 7 News continuing our live coverage.
Across the street from the Marriott, man! A second airplane, a 727, just rammed into the building!
Wow, I've never seen a plane flying so low.
Oh, shit! I'm over the door! Come on in! Come on in! Thank you. What's happening? She's not waiting for me. Down, my man! Down! Move it! Come on! Move it back up!
big explosion happened. Some guy came out. His skin was all off. I helped him out. This is him all over. There's people jumping out of windows. I've seen at least 14 people jumping out of windows. It's horrific. I can't believe this is happening.
He just said, I want to let you all know that I love you very, very much in case I don't see you again. The plane has been taken over by hijackers.
Make no mistake, the United States will hunt down and punish those responsible for these cowardly acts.
As the New York skyline changes forever, so too has the world by the most shocking terrorist attack of our time. Through the 7 network's worldwide resources, our live and uninterrupted coverage continues. At 6:30, Today Tonight asks, what's next as the world's biggest manhunt begins? Prime suspends all regular programming to bring you every picture, every breaking detail. Exclusive coverage, live reports, on air now. 7 News.
I said, oh my God! Oh my God!
Terrorists declare war on the United States.
We're good here.
There are thousands of casualties.
It was a jet. I don't believe my eyes.
With Ross Simons and Ann Sanders, this is 7 News.
Good evening. Terrorism on a scale never before experienced has struck the United States. New York and Washington were the targets, and the outcome is catastrophic. 4 passenger jets were hijacked, 2 deliberately flown into the 110-story World Trade Center, bringing down its twin towers. Another jet hit the Pentagon, and unbelievably, as many as 10,000 people may have died.
This was the darkest day in American history, and one that may have changed the world. The scale of the devastation is shocking. Tonight, whole blocks of New York are smoking ruins, and an extraordinary rescue operation is underway to find survivors in the rubble. Our coverage begins with the 7 Network's Mike Amor in Manhattan.
It was a coordinated attack on the twin symbols of US economic and military power. At 8:45 a.m., American Airlines Flight 11 was flown into one of New York's World Trade Center towers, the hijacked 767 ripping a gaping hole. 18 minutes later, as the world watched live on television, a second jet swooped, United Airlines Flight 175.
Oh my God! Oh my God!
Building. Oh, another one just hit. Something else just hit. A very large plane just flew directly over my building, and there's been another collision. Can you see it? I can see it on this shot.
Dozens of cameras caught the terrifying moment.
Yeah, the glass, just flames exploded out the front of the World Trade Center. Glass flew everywhere.
A second airplane, a 727, just ran into the building.
I just saw a second plane come in from the south and hit the south tower halfway between the bottom and the top of the tower. It's got to be a terrorist attack. I can't tell you anything more than that. I saw the plane hit the building.
Just hit, and it was a big explosion, and all this fire just started shooting out like you wouldn't believe. Just shot straight out, and all kinds of debris, including like bodies.
Hundreds died in the initial attacks. Terrified survivors could be seen at the windows. Dozens more jumped to their deaths.
There was smoke everywhere, and people are jumping out the windows. Over there, they're jumping out the windows, I guess because they're trying to save themselves. I don't know.
They just started dropping one by one, and I unfortunately, I had to... unfortunately, I had to sit there and watch them.
People jumping out. People just kept jumping and jumping and jumping. And you could still see they were alive because they were flailing around.
Then, with the evacuation still underway, the first 110-story tower collapsed. An horrific explosion of glass and rubble.
Right, well, it's going down. It's going down. Don't worry, it's going down.
Half an hour later, the second came down.
I said, oh my God! Oh my God!
Bystanders ran for their lives. Thousands more killed.
I've never seen nothing like it in my life. Come on in!
Come on in.
This is all that remains of the World Trade Center, both towers gone. Large explosions can still be heard as parts of the building fall down. Heaven help anyone inside. Among the casualties, 300 New York City firefighters, including the chief and his deputy, and at least 78 police officers, many killed after charging inside the burning buildings, bravely trying to evacuate survivors. They were caught when the buildings collapsed.
I got trapped in there with another guy, crawled out, kept getting hit in the head, had bags sold around. Finally, we fought our way out over the rubble.
You guys going back?
Yes. It's our job.
You worried about that other tower?
Personally, I am. I got fellow officers that might be trapped.
The police officer told everybody to form a human chain, and we held on to each other, and he flashed a light, and he directed us to Building 5, and we went out Building 5.
Did you see people bleeding, and what did you see?
Oh, everybody could see. You want blood? Here's blood. Everybody's bleeding. People are laying all over the floor. It's horrible. And I was there the first time, and this is twice.
10 hours later, a neighbouring 47-storey building crumbled.
They advised us to leave because we have... Oh, my God. Look behind us. Please pan in this way. Please be careful of your baby. This is it.
That's the building coming down.
Oh, my God. Oh, my God. Oh, my God.
Rescuers forced to use heavy earth-moving equipment. A day New York and all of America will mourn forever.
Please join us in a moment of silence for those lost on this day of tragedy.
Seven News reporter Mike Amor is in New York and he joins us now. Mike, desperate rescue efforts are underway.
Well, that's right, Anne. Behind me you can probably see the smoke and fire still burning at the World Trade Center. And as you say, that rescue attempt is in full swing there. Huge slabs of concrete piled on top of each other, probably millions of tons of what was the World Trade Center towers. They're hopeful but not confident of finding more survivors. About 5 hours ago they found two police officers in that wreckage who used their cell phones, in fact, to call for help. They found them alive and well.
Yes, it's a frightening situation. I guess they're hoping that there are people still buried under the rubble that can't be heard, that can't be seen, but they will get to.
Well, that's right, and the difficulty is, of course, lifting some of that wreckage up.
Yes, we've heard that 265 firefighters are feared dead and up to 100 police are still missing, so it must be a terrible search for life out there.
You have to say that they were extraordinarily brave. They charged into those two towers while they were on fire and in danger, imminent danger of collapse, trying to search for any survivors and get them out of the building. They were caught, the firefighters and police officers were caught when those two towers came tumbling down. They had no chance at all of survival. But we have heard of one case of a company of firefighters, about 6 firefighters, who were on the 30th floor of one of the towers when it came down, and somehow they were able to ride those stairs down to safety and were able to get out of the building. So I guess we are hearing some amazing escapes, but in the whole, a terrible loss of life.
Washington was the next key target. Hijackers on a suicide mission sending a doomed plane into the Pentagon Defense Headquarters. As many as 800 people are dead there, and a furious President Bush has vowed swift revenge. From Washington, 7 News reporter Damien Smith.
The Pentagon, the heart of the most powerful defense force in the world, lies burning. Hundreds of bodies buried in the rubble. American Airlines Flight 77, a Boeing 757 with 64 people on board, had taken off from nearby Dulles Airport bound for Los Angeles. As the hijackers struck, it looped back, flew low, and slammed into the Pentagon.
I mean, it was like a cruise missile with wings, went right there and slammed right into the Pentagon.
The crash left a deadly and ugly gash in the United States Military Nerve Center.
I saw a plane going down, big plane, commercial liner type, going down full speed, and just inside the side of the Pentagon.
The plane was just, the wing was up and down this way. Then with the second, just crashed straight away.
All I heard was the impact and then the flame. This huge ball of fire came up over the building.
Not long after, the upper floors collapsed, burying any hope of survivors being found from the impact area. Thousands were evacuated, pouring across the Pentagon lawns, fearing another collapse or attack. The American Airlines jet that crashed here at the Pentagon was headed across the continent to Los Angeles. Like all the jets used in these terrorist attacks, it was carrying a full load of fuel, literally a flying bomb. Washington took on the appearance of a war zone. Key buildings were cleared as rescue workers sifted through the devastated site in a vain search for survivors. F-16s, scrambled by the National Guard, flew cover over the Defense headquarters. Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld was at his desk in the Pentagon when the plane hit.
A vicious, well-coordinated, a massive attack against the United States of America.
The target of the fourth attack may never be known. The United Airlines 757 crashed into a rural area of Pennsylvania. There were no survivors.
And I heard a loud noise, and I happened to look up, and it was a plane. It was real low to me. It sounded like it was running fine to me. I just kept watching. I watched it go nosedive straight into the ground.
You could see where the plane made the initial impact in the ground, and it was still on fire. It made a crater probably 30 feet by 30 feet, and it's probably 15 or 20 feet deep, and there's just debris scattered within probably a half-a-mile radius.
The actual target of that plane may have been the White House. It had been evacuated. President George W. Bush was away in Florida. A security blanket was immediately thrown around the American leader. Air Force One became a command center, flanked all the while by protective fighter jets. He flew to a Louisiana Air Force base, then on to Washington for a speech to the nation, vowing revenge.
These acts of mass murder were intended to frighten our nation into chaos and retreat. But they have failed. Terrorist attacks can shake the foundations of our biggest buildings, but they cannot touch the foundation of America. The search is underway for those who are behind these evil acts. I've directed the full resources of our intelligence and law enforcement communities to find those responsible and to bring them to justice.
Washington and surrounding districts have been declared a national disaster area. While the rescue efforts continue, the national capital itself resembles a ghost town. But President Bush has vowed that the U.S. government, undeterred, will be back in full operation tomorrow. On Capitol Hill, congressmen and women, both Republican and Democrat, came together for a silent tribute, then a spontaneous hymn.
God bless America, my home, sweet home.
In Washington, Damien Smith, 7 News.
How did they do it? 4 teams of hijackers defeating security controls to simultaneously seize control of 4 airliners. It's believed the terrorists forced the pilots from the flight decks and took control of the planes themselves.
They were all full of fuel for the long flight to the West Coast. Out of Boston for Los Angeles, an American Airlines 767 with 92 on board. It hit the North Tower. And a United Airlines 767 with 65 aboard, it hit the South Tower. From Dulles Airport near Washington, an American 757 carrying 64 crashed into the Pentagon. And from New Jersey, headed for San Francisco, a United 757 with 45 on board crashed in the Pennsylvania countryside, short of whatever its target was.
This is terrorists.
Even with a gun at their head, you can't imagine an airline pilot doing this.
I suspect that what we're going to find is that the pilots were overwhelmed, perhaps dead already, and that trained pilots from the hijacker camp were in charge of those aircraft and were willing to die for their beliefs.
The captain of the first plane to hit was 52-year-old John Oganowski. This is his brother.
I ask all of you for your prayers, for as I refer to him as Brother John.
Some passengers managed calls on their cell phones. "We're being hijacked," one said. Another said the crew was dead. Barbara Olson worked for CNN. She told her husband the hijackers had knives and had moved everyone to the back of the plane.
She said that they were armed with knives and box cutters, cardboard cutters.
They think now there were 3 to 5 hijackers on each plane and that they attacked the female flight attendants first. To get on board, they either made it through the security checks or through locked doors into off-limits areas. The flight recorders, if they're found, will tell what happened on those planes, but this was a monumental security failure. 4 planes hijacked, 3 out of 4 targets hit. Paul Marshall, 7.
Australian Prime Minister John Howard was caught in the middle of the terrorist attack as it unfolded during his tour of the United States. The 7 Network's chief political correspondent, Glenn Milne, is travelling with Mr Howard, and he joins us now from Washington. Well, Glenn, how has the Prime Minister reacted?
Ross, the Prime Minister has expressed sympathy and strong support for the United States. But of course these events have thrown his schedule here right out the window, and as we speak, it's unclear exactly how the Prime Minister is going to get home. The Prime Minister was holding a news conference at his Washington hotel only minutes after the catastrophe in New York when terror struck again only 3 kilometres away at the Pentagon. Through a window in the room next door to Mr Howard, flames and smoke could be seen suddenly billowing from the nerve centre of the US military. Mr Howard was there only the day before. As US soldiers and police took control of Washington's streets, American Secret Servicemen and Australian federal agents immediately evacuated the Prime Minister from his hotel. He was rushed to the safe haven of the Australian Embassy 10 blocks away. Mrs Howard and son Tim joined him shortly after in a security bunker 2 floors below the embassy. Secret agents unloading semi-automatic weapons and sealing the building. A clearly moved Prime Minister emerged 3 hours later to express his horror at what he called an act of war.
America has been hurt by today's events, but the American spirit will not be daunted or bowed or diminished by these events.
But it's now certain his trip to the US will be cut short, and he'll return home as soon as practicable, possibly by RAAF jet. Late today, the decision came to move the Prime Minister. Mr Howard and his family were taken from the embassy to the Australian ambassador's residence in Washington suburbs. Mr Howard tonight remains at the Australian ambassador's residence, but with all aircraft movements here shut down for at least another 8 hours, he won't be going anywhere immediately. He'll be very much guided by the US Secret Service, which has now taken control of this trip. Ross?
OK, Glenn, thank you for that.
It seems inevitable there will be Australians among the casualties. The Foreign Affairs Department fears as many as 50. Up to 15,000 Australians could be there either working or on holidays. A Sydney man is believed to have died aboard one of the hijacked planes. An executive from the Westfield company is missing in the shattered World Trade Center. An emergency hotline has been set up for Australians concerned about friends or relatives. The numbers to call are 1800 002 214 or 1300 555 135. The Foreign Affairs Department has extra staff to take calls, but they are overloaded. Patience is urged. Those numbers again, 1800 002 214 or 1300 555 135.
Suspicion for this act falls on the world's most feared terrorist, Osama bin Laden, the man responsible for a series of attacks on America and its assets. But even US authorities are amazed he could organise such a devastating blow.
When explosions hit the Afghan capital, some assumed American revenge attacks had begun. Afghanistan harbours the Islamic terrorist leader and number 1 suspect, the Saudi Arabian-born billionaire Osama bin Laden. Crush the United States, he says, in this recent video featuring one of his terrorist training camps for thousands of fanatic fighters. Just days ago, his extremist group warned a London-based Arabic newspaper of a huge and unprecedented attack.
We know that American was warned several times before about these kind of attacks.
Osama bin Laden is wanted over the first World Trade Center attack 8 years ago and the bombing of an American warship and US embassies in Africa. Distancing themselves from bin Laden, Afghanistan's rulers have condemned the terrorist attack, insisting they don't support the Saudi terrorist. Some Palestinians celebrated news of the carnage in America. Their leader Yasser Arafat put a stop to the street demonstrations and offered his condolences.
We are completely shocked. Unbelievable.
Britain, America's biggest ally, has its airports, government and military on high alert, ready to help. Declarations of solidarity and support have also come from old enemies, like Russia and even Libyan leader Colonel Gaddafi. So far, no state or credible organisation has claimed responsibility for the world's worst terror attack, which required much planning, money and expertise. The explosions over Kabul turned out to be part of an ongoing civil war, but the billionaire terrorist leader and chief suspect has put Afghanistan high on the United States hit list. In the European Bureau, Tim Verstegen, 7 News.
Australia is not immune from the threat of terrorism, with the nation now on a rare security alert. At particular risk, facilities with American links.
As news of the attack broke, police swarmed around the US Embassy just a stone's throw from Parliament House.
We've moved to lift security in Australia, as I say, in many instances to very high levels indeed.
In Sydney, Melbourne and Perth, police restricted access to US consular facilities. And it wasn't just the US they were concerned about.
ASIO has increased surveillance of and protection and has arranged for additional protection in relation to Israeli and Jewish assets in Australia.
At Pine Gap and other joint military bases, security was beefed up. Vehicles were checked as they entered the compounds. 3 US warships in Darwin Harbour were put to sea.
All Commonwealth buildings in Parliament, including the Parliament here in Canberra, have been put on special alert.
Foreign Affairs also had to deal with an avalanche of inquiries. Staff numbers in the department's emergency room would triple as people rang a special hotline.
Hello, Crisis Centre.
No one in government can recall a higher state of general alert in Australia, not even during the Gulf War. The difference being, during that conflict, we knew who the enemy was. Strategic analysts say the risk to US facilities in Australia could escalate.
If this becomes a precedent rather than an isolated act, then the tendency will be for US interests outside the continental United States to be drawn into the vortex.
Airlines were spooked by events in New York and Washington. A United Airlines jet bound for Sydney was ordered to Brisbane after a scare involving a computer game. It was a false alarm. Extra police were sent to protect Bill Clinton, who's on holiday in North Queensland. And the police and military are re-evaluating security for the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting in Brisbane next month.
We've got to be careful in these things that we don't let the lunatics win, because terrorism is designed to intimidate.
In Canberra, Jeff Pound, 7 News.
Flights to the United States were grounded in Sydney today. Airlines told no planes could fly anywhere in or to the United States. It's created travel chaos, and no one's sure when they'll be allowed to get passengers in the air.
There were no smiles at the airport, just tears and stares of disbelief. Passengers on every plane arriving from the United States told us they touched down, jets at home had been hijacked, crashed into buildings, and thousands of Americans were dead.
It really was. It felt like somebody hit you in the gut or something, and you just... all I'm thinking is, oh boy, I don't know what's going to happen now.
At the terminal, hugs and kisses were forgotten as they looked at piles of rubble where some of them had been only yesterday.
We all work in the trade area, and close friends probably have gone.
Others numb, fearing the people who farewelled them are now dead.
I don't know, I'm here in a strange country and I don't know how to even contact anyone. Because my family works there.
Ambulance officers say some passengers were physically sick, others went into shock.
Thinking about it, it makes you wonder, it could have been me.
Some passengers that couldn't contact family members back in the States wanted to get on a plane and fly straight home. But with all flights cancelled, all they could do was head to a hotel room, waiting for the phone lines to clear or watching the television coverage, hoping to catch a glimpse of a relative. Security at Sydney Airport intensified. Baggage lockers opened and searched. Everyone and every piece of cargo going on or off a plane, x-rayed and searched.
11 p.m. last night,
Contact was established between the relevant state and Commonwealth agencies. The National Anti-Terrorist Plan was activated immediately.
It will mean delays, but the upgraded security will continue indefinitely. All United Airlines jets are grounded, they're parked, locked up and isolated on the tarmac.
Very frightening for us all, actually, the whole ramifications of it all.
Strikes planned by Qantas staff for today were cancelled. They combined with Ansett workers to donate a day's pay to the families of the American flight crews killed. Prayers and flowers for the victims left outside the US consulate near Martin Place. Thoughts for mums and dads and children they never met, but people they'll never forget. At St Mary's, they lit as many candles as they could for the spirits of the dead, while at Sydney's biggest mosque, expressions of sympathy for the victims, but speaking through a translator, the Mufti warned no one should blame local Muslims.
The investigations will confirm that this criminal act was actually, in fact, committed by American citizens.
The tragedy has horrified people, but it's something city workers have felt compelled to watch. Giant screens used during the Olympics, again relaying the latest developments in Martin Place and Circular Quay.
Well, just minutes ago, our CNN coverage mentioned...
Condolence books will be opened at Town Hall and Circular Quay tomorrow, while the flags on the Harbour Bridge and all state government buildings will fly at half-mast for 2 days. Darren Curtis, 7 News.
The United States is the world's largest economy and already on the brink of recession. The US share market didn't open, but those that did plunged, including the Australian Stock Exchange. Bank, airline and insurance stocks were hit hardest.
The World Trade Center was the symbol of global prosperity. Around the corner from the New York Stock Exchange, the home of capitalism, Asian and European markets went into freefall. Security tightened as our market plunged 125 points in the first half hour.
Certainly this is the worst day I've seen in horrific in the market.
There's fear this could push America into recession of an oil crisis.
It will affect some Australian companies which had significant investments there in New York, but we shouldn't overestimate it. The US is a huge economy.
The American Federal Reserve is set to pump more cash into that economy to help rebuild confidence quickly.
It should be a business-as-usual approach because we shouldn't let these acts of terrorism succeed.
Investors bought up gold as a safe haven for their cash. It jumped $20 an ounce. Oil rose above $30 a barrel on fears any American retaliation could spark a Middle East oil crisis.
But in coming days, we expect normality to return to the global economy. Oil prices will come back down and the spike in oil prices will be unwound.
Just 2 months ago, Australia's Westfield Holdings bought the huge retail mall in the basement of the Twin Towers. It was set to be the jewel in Westfield's crown, America's richest shopping centre, 75 stores and restaurants. The company says its insurance cover includes acts of terrorism. Its profits will not be affected.
Westfield shares have dropped approximately 6% against the market fall of about 4%.
Our market performed relatively well compared with those in Asia and Europe. The New York Stock Exchange will remain closed tonight, and analysts say that until it reopens, global financial markets will remain on edge. David Koch, 7 News.
Well, the terrorist attacks in America have led to a 4% slump on the Australian market. All the major stocks went down, AMP plunging $1.28. The ASX 200 lost 133 points. The All Ordinaries, 132. Investors switched into resource stocks like Caltex and Woodside Petroleum, while financial shares dived. The Australian dollar is steady at 51.9 US cents and $1.20 New Zealand. Now to other news and Australia's airline crisis. Ansett is likely to be liquidated within days as desperate talks to save the carrier continue. Qantas today ruled out purchasing any part of the stricken airline. A second plan to set up a budget airline similar to Virgin Blue collapsed after the federal government refused to underwrite the option. But Ansett's parent company, Air New Zealand, has made a fresh approach for taxpayer support, saying it's been contacted by other potential purchasers during the day. 16,000 jobs are at stake.
All right, let's take a look at our weather now, and here's Adam.
Thanks, Anne. Good evening, everyone. Thunderstorms rolling across Sydney today as the state and national flags flew at half-mast from the Harbour Bridge. Temperatures reaching 20 to 21 degrees, slightly above average, 22 in Penrith, 16 in the city right now. Satellite pictures showing a swirl of cloud with showers and thunderstorms starting to clear the east coast this afternoon. Frontal cloud in the Bight and some high cloud to the northwest not expected to affect Sydney greatly. There's a lighter side to the weather. Sunshine is on the way as this high system replaces the departing low. There'll be the chance of showers Friday as that front slips by before a fine and sunny weekend ahead. Nationally, state capitals looking forward to a good day, just the chance of an evening shower turning up around Adelaide. On the waterways, choppy seas on 1.5 metres of swell, fresh to strong southerly winds, sunrise just before 6, setting at 5:44. Sydney's forecast for Thursday, the 13th of September. A few showers tonight, clearing tomorrow morning. It'll be partly cloudy with some westerly winds turning southerly, and the pollen, it's quite kind to us, staying in the medium range tomorrow, Ross and Anne.
Okay. Thanks, Adam.
That's the situation to this minute, 6:30pm in Sydney, 4:30am on the east coast of America.
Stand by now for a special edition of Today Tonight, and we'll be back at 7 when we resume our continuous live coverage of this extraordinary tragedy in the United States. See you then.
Good evening and welcome to an uncertain world. The United States has likened the terrorist attack on the World Trade Center and the Pentagon to Pearl Harbor. And the world is now holding its breath as we wait to see what happens next. The most powerful nation in the world has vowed revenge, not only against the terrorists, but any country that harbours them. Thousands of innocent people have been killed. Later we'll meet a couple of Aussies caught right in the thick of it, but first Howard Gibbs looks at the events that changed the world.
8:45am, New York time. The Manhattan skies are clear after a night of violent thunderstorms. Downtown at the World Trade Center, thousands of workers are sitting down at their desks for their day ahead. Moments later, the North Tower of this potent symbol of American economic supremacy is in flames. There's been a massive explosion.
As Matt just mentioned, we have a breaking news story to tell you about. Apparently, a plane has just crashed into the World Trade Center here in New York City.
1 second after the sound started, there was gray smoke and what looked to be like confetti flying all over the place.
Above, fire and death. Below, confusion as 10,000 people attempt to escape. No one knows what's happened, what is happening. Unbelievable horror. Desperate people jumping from the burning skyscraper. Bloody clothing and bits of people scattered on the streets. New York's gallant emergency crews had been through something like this back in '93, when the same building was hit by a truck bomb. But the scale of today's attacks is a quantum escalation in terror. Then, at 9:03, less than 20 minutes after the first strike, with police and rescue personnel still scrambling to respond to God knows what, this. Live cameras pointed at the first stricken tower capture another huge explosion, this one on the South Tower. Only this time they can see the cause clearly. Will this be the most infamous act of evil ever recorded by a camera? An American Airlines 767 with 92 people on board hijacked on its flight from Boston to Los Angeles. Now, it's a weapon of mass murder. The effect, devastating. The fully fueled airliner punching into the huge tower, straight through the outer skin, becoming a fireball inside. And outside, another rain of glass, concrete, and terror.
I was just standing here watching the World Trade Center after the first plane hit. I just saw a second plane come in from the south and hit the South Tower halfway between the bottom and the top of the tower. It's got to be a terrorist attack. I can't tell you anything more than that. I saw the plane hit the building.
Now it was clear this was no accident. The first tower had also been hit by a hijacked passenger jet, a United flight that had also taken off from Boston bound for LA. At 9:30, an hour and 3/4 after the first attack, President Bush spoke to America from Florida.
Today we've had a national tragedy. 2 airplanes have crashed into the World Trade Center in an apparent terrorist attack on our country.
But even as he spoke, there's another attack, this one even more audacious. The target this time, the Pentagon, and another American Airlines jet, and another direct hit. NBC's Pentagon correspondent found himself in the middle of it.
It felt just a few moments ago like there was an explosion of some kind here at the Pentagon.
Pull up. Pull up.
9:43 a.m. With concerns that the White House could be another target, President Bush boarded Air Force One bound for a special secure command post at a military base. But at 9:49, the national emergency escalates again. All the nation's air traffic is shut down. The reason? Hundreds of passenger planes crisscrossing the country with thousands of passengers on board are now potential terrorist weapons. But this blackest of days has more in store. At 9:59 a.m, the Trade Center's South Tower, the building that took the second hit, begins to crumble. In a matter of seconds, the unthinkable happens. The skyscraper collapses, and it's gone.
Never seen nothing like it in my life. Come on in! Come on in! Yeah. Thank you.
I mean, the collapse happened 10 minutes after I got the camera. I shot a couple of shots of the building burning.
An NBC TV producer was there with his home video camera.
You know, I was down in Oklahoma City, and I got there about 4 hours afterwards, and that was pretty chaotic. This was about 1,000 times worse.
It's 10 a.m, and now news of another passenger plane in trouble. Someone on United Airlines Flight 93, travelling from Newark Airport to San Francisco, called the police with their mobile and reported a hijacking. Then there was silence. The plane crashed here, 120 kilometres outside Pittsburgh, with 45 people on board. So the grim toll stands at 3 passenger jets used kamikaze style, and a 4th that could have been. 266 people on board killed, and the death toll on the ground, well, no one wants to contemplate that. Then at 10:30, the tower that's still standing follows its twin, collapsing, vanishing in a cloud of smoke. At 5:21 p.m, as Australia is having breakfast this morning, a third building at the World Trade Center collapses.
This is it.
That's the building coming down.
Oh my God. Oh my God. Oh my God. No.
And so the rescue goes on, the disbelief slowly becoming grief and anger.
I mean, you just cannot overemphasize how many completely innocent, beautiful people were just, destroyed by this.
And hanging above this, Paul, that question, who did it?
It is hard to imagine the sheer terror those people felt during the attacks. And for those who survived, the memories will last a lifetime. Australians were caught up in it too. People like Adelaide businessman John Hender, who was right in the thick of it. And I spoke to him a few minutes ago.
We were maybe 2